meeting today by welcoming everyone to our meeting this Sunday. It's a pleasure to see so many friends, old and new, join us here today at the Sunrise Spirit Society of Texas. As I was mentioning, this is our first English service ever since we've started our organization 3 years ago. So 3 years ago in September, we formed the Sunrise Spirit Society of Texas in Houston, and have um, we have been operating in Portuguese in the Sunday public studies, and we've decided to, as part of the larger celebration period, right? We are starting early in August to celebrate our third anniversary, and we wanted then to have our really dear friend Julio Carvalho honor us today with his talk. So what we're going to do here today is, in a second here, I'm going to introduce Julio, and then I'm going to turn to our dear friend Antulio Borneo from the Sunrise, uh, group here, our team, who is going to conduct the opening prayer for us, and then we're gonna go to the talk, and we're gonna see the topic in a second here, and at the end, as I said before, I'm gonna ask my dear sister Andrea Haddad Amorim from the Centro de Estudios Espíritas Allan Kardec in Panama to conduct our closing prayer and distant healing for us, and that will conclude the services. We'll have also our announcements at the end with Claudia Oliveira, who is one of our directors as well. Okay, so let me, without further ado, let me then have the pleasure to introduce Julio Carvalho with us here. So Julio, is truly a pleasure. It's an honor. Really grateful for you having accepted the invite to being here with us today. Julio is the founder and co-director of the Spirit Center Divine Light in Newark, New Jersey. He's a member of the Spirits Federation, where he works actively in the Department of Public Speaking. Mr. Carvalho participates in national and international congresses representing the United States and the Tri-State Spiritist Federations. Professionally, he is a licensed clinical social worker with 20-year experience in public speaking in the field of mental health, group administration, and emotional well-being. He worked as a psychotherapist for Compassionate Care Hospice. Academically, he has a bachelor in biology and a master's degree in social work at the Kean University. Julio is going to talk about prejudice, racism, and spiritism. Julio, thank you so much for being here.
My friend Haddad, thank you so much for this invitation. I am truly honored to actually be the first one to start this very important activity, which all of us think they are not only important, but extremely essential for us to disseminate this knowledge that has profoundly touched each one of us in so many different ways in order to improve our lives. So congratulations, kudos to you and the entire group for deciding to start this activity. The reason why we decided to speak on this subject, it's because of all the social upheavals that we have seen lately, which brings so many strong emotions to all different kinds of people. And usually when there is a talk, there is a conversation, a topic, the individuals involved in the conversation at times could be talking about the same thing and not knowing, because they're using different words, or because they have different definitions for the same word. So I think to make our conversation very clear, we need to first talk about the words that we're going to be using that describes the main topic. And let's start with the word prejudice. What does prejudice stands for? I know most of us have a urban definition of what prejudice is. But if you try to consult the dictionary, you would see that the word prejudice has a very strong relationship with the word judgment. Uh, and so then one can say that prejudice, it's sort of a prejudgment. And what is judgment? From time to time, you hear people saying that one should not judge. And what they mean by this is that one should see others and not judge their action. But that's quite hard. And reason being, it's because the natural consequence of you gaining knowledge is to make a judgment, in the sense that to judge is to actually distinguish right from wrong. To judge is to have a discernment of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. For example, a judge is a paid professional by the legal service to pass judgment on people. Now, ideally, the judge will not make any decision until he has reflected over time upon the individual's case. Not only this, but the judge will hear from both sides, both the defense and the prosecutor, about the individual that is being tried. So after the judge gathers enough information, the judge will pass judgment. He will make his decision. And his decision is based upon this information he has gained over time, the result of deep reflection. And then, according to the code of law, he will pass judgment on this individual that is being tried. So, in a sense, to judge is to actually have an idea about something or someone. So when you have knowledge, when you gain knowledge by reading, by watching, by studying, you will automatically have a judgment. You have an idea about something or someone. That is the result of knowledge, which is to make a discernment, to distinguish the information that you have in front of you, to understand. That would be judgment. But the urban understanding of judgment is that you should not judge people, and which is impossible. Reason being, it's because once you have gained knowledge, judgment is automatically, in a sense that it's impossible for you not to make a discernment, not to distinguish right from wrong. So to not judge someone through the lenses of this philosophy, through the lenses of the Spiritist philosophy, is actually to believe that we will never do what the other person is doing. That will be judgment. To actually believe that what the other person is doing, we will never do it ourselves. Now, I know you might be into situations in which you say to yourself, I would never do something like that. But you never placed yourself in the other person's shoes. To actually not judge someone is to put yourself in their place, with their experience, with their sum of knowledge, with their background, with their surroundings, and the condition they find themselves in. By putting all these factors together, you will arrive that what the other person is doing is probably something that you also do. You probably do the same thing or even worse. So this understanding that I would not judge, meaning I think that I'll probably do the same or even worse, brings forth compassion in you. And what is compassion? Compassion has many different facets, but one of facets, I'm sorry, facades. But one of the facades of compassion is to understand why the individual behave the way they do. So when you understand, when you put yourself in their shoes, you have this understanding, you have this compassion why they behave the way they do. And the result of compassion is that instead of you attacking the other individual for not doing what you think he or she should do, you will actually have the means to help. You will find within yourself somehow the means to provide help instead of attacking this individual for his or her actions. So that's judgment right there. To judge is to make a rational opinion after you have knowledge, you have thorough knowledge of an idea or a person. And that is the result of time upon reflection and, once again, knowledge. So now that we know what judgment is, what then would be prejudgment or prejudice? Well, prejudgment is to actually make up an idea about a person or something without no prior knowledge. You're just looking at someone or something, and you already have upon your head a full concept of what this person or thing should be or what they are based upon this glance that you have of this person or something. That would be prejudice. You have a pre idea, you have a pre concept of this person without knowing them, without giving yourself time, without having any reflection upon who you're looking at. That would be prejudice. And there are many different kinds of prejudice. There is prejudice of social class, prejudice of sexual orientation. That in itself would take a whole seminar to cover. Prejudice of sexism, prejudice of obesity. Now, sometimes people misunderstand or have a confusion about being prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice in itself is just a thought that we have, an emotion that we experience about someone, a pre-concept, an idea that you have before knowing that person. You're judging them just by what they present to you on a first glance. Now, discrimination, on the other hand, are the actions that one carry based upon our pre-notions of that person, based upon our precept, our prejudgment, our prejudice that we have about that person. For example, let's say I am an employer. I owe some type of business. And my prejudice is that obese individuals are lazy. I look at them, I see that they're way above their normal weight. And then my prejudice is that they are lazy by definition. And what would be the discrimination? I won't hire them just because they are obese. That would be the discrimination. Or I might say to myself, individuals from this particular country have a tendency to fight a lot. That's my prejudice. What would be the discrimination? Not hiring that particular individual. So there are different kinds of prejudice that leads to different kind of discrimination. But because of the late social upheavals, I would like to concentrate on racism. And what is racism? It's the pre-concept. It's this a notion that we have before we get to know the individual simply by looking at their race. I, in my mind, think that I have this individual completely figured out solely upon looking at his skin color. And unfortunately, if there is a news not widely spread, it's the fact that we all have the same origin. All of us, despite of our skin color, despite where we come from, despite where we were born, all of us have the same ancestors. All of us came from the same place on this earth. And that place is Africa. There's a branch of science called anthropology, and anthropology study the evolution of humans. And then there is paleoanthropology, and so we have here the word paleo means very old. Anthropology, pology means study of. Anthropo means a man, the study of men. I'm not referring here to the being of the male sex, but rather the population that encompasses both male and female. And all of us came from Africa. And this was something so hard to swallow, even by the scientists of the last century, because anthropologists back in Europe uh, could not fathom the fact that we all came from Africa. It was hard for them to actually accept that anything good could come from Africa, because you even had racism in science. And science is supposed to be completely neutral about these things. You just follow the fact. And what happened is that there were some anthropologists and paleoanthropologists and archaeologists all in Africa studying fossils remains there. And they start sending these fossils to scientists in Europe. And once they began to uh, study the fossils and date the fossils, they realized these fossils were much, much older than any fossils found in Europe. So, with scientific facts, there are no arguments. They had to accept. But, there was so much resistance just because they could not accept that something good could come out of Africa. But further studies into this, and then you had the geneticists, who are individuals who study our DNA, and they focus on mitochondrial DNA. And this is a DNA in our cells, in the powerhouse of the cell called the mitochondria, that only comes from our mothers. And they concentrate on these studies in order to pinpoint, exact locations of the birthplace of the human genome. And it's so interesting when you delve into these studies. More and more, there are evidence of our ancestors coming from different locations in Africa. And they all have an agreement now, the scientists, that we all came from Africa. But then there are the disagreements on where exactly in Africa we came from. And the one of the recent findings of fossils happened actually in South Africa, in a cave called the Rising Star. And in this cave, that they found in hundreds and upon hundreds of fossils. And after the study, the team of scientists to proclaim their findings, they actually went to the Church of Desmond Tutu. And this was so beautiful to watch. Who was Desmond Tutu? Desmond Tutu was the human rights fighter, together with Nelson Mandela, who fought for the equal rights of all citizens in South Africa back in the 1960s. And so he was there. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. This fantastic individual. So he's there at his church. And so the scientists, they come in to tell the entire world what their findings are. And so they say, once again, this is more evidence that we all came from Africa. We all have the same origin. So Desmond Tutu, after hearing that, he wisely said, isn't this the way we should interpret the story of Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve were not necessarily two individuals, but they represent a symbol that all of us came from the same family. And if we all came from the same family, by definition, we are brothers and sisters. So from the scientific point of view, there is no room at all for racism, because this understanding that I am better than you or you're better than me based upon our skin color has no grounds in science, because science says that we all have the same origin, all the same family. But, those who are not versed in science, they might argue, well, if we all then became from the same family, how in the world are we so different from one another? Well, this is the reason. Our body has a great ability to adapt to different environments. So let's say you live in a tropical country, or you live here in Florida, and then suddenly you move to Canada. Now, Canada is bitter cold. So when you get there, your first week, you're going to suffer a lot. It's so cold that it hurts your bones. But then after a while, you get used to the cold. It's not that suddenly you won't perceive any sensation of cold. It's the fact that you get used to the cold and it doesn't bother you that much. And that's because your body has adapted itself to that environment. Now, if the body was able to adapt to such a different environment in a short amount of time, imagine what our bodies are able to when it has at its disposal, millions of years. So our body adapted to different environment throughout the millennia. So I'll give you an example. So let's pretend here my cell phone is actually the world. And so Africa, it's right here. It's closer to the center of the planet. And by being at the center of the planet, it receives more sunlight. It's the days are constant in reference to the amount of light that you get by living here around the tropical area of the world. So what happened as we moved upwards, as there were these great migrations, and recent studies suggests that, and it's an agreement between the scientists. And of course, within the scientific community, there's always disagreement because this is how you gain more knowledge. You delve into the same study and you find different data and you continue studying. And so there were for a time a consensus that there were a single migration coming out of Africa about 50,000 years ago. So, when you move out of Africa, you have thousands of years, generation upon generation, they're walking away from the center of the planet. And as a result, because they're going upward, there is less and less sunlight that they are receiving. You all know that when you go up north, there is less sunlight. And sunlight is vital for many different things. The sun is truly the center of all life for many different scientific reasons, which we don't have the time to get to it. But one of the reasons we need sunlight is to actually produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is essential for many physiological functions. And as you move upward and you get less and less sunlight, your body needs to adapt to that change. And indeed it did. It began to have less and less melanin, which is the pigment in our skin. So our skin became lighter to allow more sunlight to go through. So let me repeat that. Our skin became lighter to allow the sunlight to go through. That's the reason. It's an adaptive technique in our bodies to absorb sunlight. And nowadays, if you have someone who has a very dark skin and suddenly they move to up north in Canada or in Serbia, somewhere really up north, what's going to happen? In Russia, uh, they will probably have a vitamin D deficiency. So they need to supply with vitamin D. They cannot get all the sunlight because their skin color does not allow to go through. But when we have thousands of years to adapt, our body actually changed its color. And that's the reason why we look different. But we are from the same family. We all came from same Africa. So truthfully, we're all brothers and sisters. There is no room here for racism to think that we're better than other people just because our skin color looks different or that individual comes from another country, which is prejudice of ethnicity. We all are from the same family. And I know some of you, still find differences because we are so different physiologically. Take, for example, the coronavirus situation. When the coronavirus hit and we all went to quarantine, after people started to die, there were some studies to understand why certain populations were dying disproportionately than other populations. And it was noticed that the African American community were dying disproportionately than whites. And some studies suggests it was because of people's diet. When you check the CDC website, and we all became aware of this, that the coronavirus lethality was more against people who had comorbidities. In other words, coronavirus would kill those who actually had a comorbidity. The proportion, the propensity to actually kill someone was higher if the individual had a comorbidity, such as diabetes or hypertension. Now, where do you get diabetes and hypertension from? Well, you get from our diet, the way we eat, our lifestyle. So if individuals consume a lot of salt, for example, that will lead to hypertension. If individuals consume lots of sugar, red meat, that will lead to diabetes. And because African Americans have this delicious food, they call soul food, which is indeed baked with, lots of salt and hydrogenated oils, that might lead to these physical conditions and to obesity, and therefore coronavirus were killing more people, more African American, due to their lifestyle. But some other individuals that were also studying this issue, they said that we should point to actually slavery for being responsible of the coronavirus crisis amongst the African American community. And other people might ask, how in the world something that happened such a long time ago have an impact on our today's society? Well, I break down to you. You see, when the government came in, the state government, and said, let's all quarantine ourselves, everybody stay home, and let's protect ourselves from this virus. If my ancestors came here to work, if individuals who came from Ireland, they came here to work, individuals who came from all different parts of Europe, they came here to work. So my great-great-great-father, when he arrived here, he worked and he amassed money, and that money which was transferred to my great-grandfather. And then my great-grandfather amassed this money and gave it to my great-father. And my great-father passed on to my father, and my father passed on to me. And as a result, I was able to attend excellent schools. I was able to have a very good education program for myself. And as a result, I found myself an excellent office job. So when the government comes and tells me, quarantine yourself, I have the luxury to do that. I could just go home and open up my laptop and continue to work. But if I am African American, my ancestors did not come here to work, to gain money. They came here to be slaves, forced labor. My great grandfather worked very hard as a slave and did not amass any money. And he had nothing to transfer to my great grandfather. My great grandfather had nothing to pass on to my grandfather. My grandfather had nothing to pass on to my father. And my father could only had a minimum wage job, for example, or a physical job that did not give him too much wealth. And as a result, he could not afford a good education program for me. And as a result, I had to limit myself to find work that I actually have to expose myself to coronavirus. For example, as a bus driver. So the argument here was not so much lifestyle, but the conditions I had to put myself into in order to continue to work. So as a bus driver, I don't have the luxury to stay at home. I must go out there and expose myself to the virus. And with so many other different jobs, that's what happened. People were in a situation in which they were forced to expose themselves because they had no other option. And that was one of the arguments presented. And it's at times it's very hard for individuals to understand these issues if you're not if you're not making the effort to see the other person's point of view. At times, it's hard for some people to understand. Why is it there is so much rage in the African American community when they watch the protests on TV? And let me just open a parenthesis here. It's our constitutional right to protest. What is a constitutional right? You see, we live within a community of approximately 330 million people here in the US. Imagine if everyone could do as they please. Well, there has to be a document that lays out what are our rights and obligations towards everybody else. And that document's called the Constitution. And what people have to realize that those that we call our leaders, government officials, they're not necessarily our leaders. They are our employees. We, the taxpayers, pay them in order for them to serve us. It's the other way around. I don't know why people lost this concept that suddenly they became our leaders and we became the servants. That's not the way it goes. Government has no money of their own. The money that they have are paid by taxpayers, people like you and I. So they're there to serve us and not the other way around. And when there's something going on that we don't like, it's not attending to our well-being, we have the right to complain. We have the right to protest, which means let's change things. And this is why we go on the street and you demand for change. Now, this has nothing to do that we are in agreement with the breaking of cars and looting, none of that. As a matter of fact, many protesters who protest their rights in a very peaceful, democratic way, they are completely displeased, the least to say, with these individuals that take advantage of the protest in order to do breaking of cars, looting and assaulting. None of this is part of a democratic demonstration. So at times it's hard for people to understand, why so much rage? And that's because if people understood just a little bit of history, they would understand why there is so much rage. Because the acts that we have seen a couple of months in regards to Floyd, it It's a repetition. It's an idea that reinforces this concept that there is a superior race and then there is an inferior race. And I have many friends of mine who are police officers and state troopers. And unfortunately, they were so upset with that scene because that, unfortunately, one person gives a bad image to lots of individuals who every day go to work and do their job in the most professional way by treating people equally. But that example right there, with with today's technology and everyone video and everything, uh, unfortunately gives us the notion that everybody else is like that. And that is a misconception. It's a misunderstanding of the reality. There are good people and bad people everywhere. It's not a particular race. It's not a particular ethnicity. If you have an opportunity to travel, you would see that you will find people of quality and people who are just sick in their minds with their behavior everywhere you go. So when you see these things and you watch the protests and you don't understand, where the rage come from, study a little bit of history here, because I think most people know about the Holocaust, and the Holocaust happened between 1939 and 1945. During the World War II, and that took about 4 to 5 years, and it killed, Hitler with its Nazi regime killed approximately 6 million Jews. And but the slavery over here in the U.S. happened for 250 years. 250 years. That's a long time. And as recent as 1932, from 1932 to 1972, just around the corner, like for about 50 years ago, there was this experiment called the Tuskegee experiment, in which um, the U.S. government, through the Minister of Health, injected syphilis in the African community population just to study the development of the disease. This is so painful to remember and to report, but these things took place. And if one tries to understand the rage of the African American community, we will see that they have plenty of reasons to do so. But once again, this has absolutely nothing to do that we applaud any of the looting and stealing and breaking of things that happened in a minority of individuals in those protests, but unfortunately make a bad name for a lot of people as well. And some of these lootings and breaking down that happened, for example, the destruction of statues. Some of the statues that represented this period of oppression, they were still live symbols of what took place so recently in history. So it's understandable why they want to take these statues down. But we also heard about people in some parts of the world taking the statues of other individuals who actually fought for equality or fought against oppression. And this is a completely misunderstanding here. How come you removing the statue of Winston Churchill, for example? Winston Churchill, if it wasn't for him, Hitler would have conquered the entire Europe and maybe probably the whole world. So we owe the Western world the winning of the Second World War a lot to Winston Churchill having the courage to fight this man and his Nazi party. And there were people removing the statue of Winston Churchill in these protests. And I guess they don't know history, or they're not even watching movies. So, my friends, there is no room for racism. And there's a lot of work to do because people completely misunderstands or ignores the fact of science. We are all from the same family. We all came from the same place on this planet. Thus, that makes us brothers and sisters automatically. It's so painful if you belong to a certain race and you constantly see on TV these things being portrayed that you are inferior. I remember when I was doing my master's, and one day there was a bomb threat in our school. And this bomb threat and this threat against the well beings of individuals were not solely to any college student, but rather to the African American community. And that day, we were in class, and our teacher asked me if I could accompany one of our classmates to her car, who happens to be African American. So I took her to her car, and it was a long way from our class to the parking lot. And we were having a regular conversations, not about this issue, but in my mind throughout the entire walk here, I was thinking to myself, how in the world can this lady feel right now? Here I am. I was not even born here in this great land. I was 12 years old. And, I have a different ethnicity, and I'm the one who have to take her to her car to protect her. She was born here. It felt awful. It was a very emotional night for all of us. And in the back of my mind, I could not fathom the idea of how horrible she felt that, not necessarily because of me, but because of the circumstances, the condition where I came from, and I'm the one who had to escort her to her car. So, these are ideas at times that reinforces this notion and this prejudgment, this thinking that you know something just because you are seeing someone's skin color. It's completely naive, if not very, very sick. Some people say, but you actually see crimes in these particular communities. I worked in the jail system for 12 years. In those 12 years, I provided psychotherapy to approximately 23,000 inmates. I had to report my stats to the prosecutor who ran this mental ill program. And indeed, the individuals in this jail, most of them, they were African American males. But they were not there necessarily because of their skin color. It's not the skin color that led them to those conditions. What led them to those conditions were social conditions. Social conditions. You are placed in an environment because of your ancestors' heritage. This environment leads to vulnerability. You're poor. And with being poor comes all these different obstacles that if you're not poor, it's hard for you not to understand. I'm not saying that when you are poor, that automatically leads you to a life of crime. However, it would be very naive for us to claim that by being poor, you have the same opportunities as being rich, or you don't have the same problems as rich people don't have these problems. That would be very naive to say, because when we are placed in a certain social conditions, there would be cultural constraints and also influence of all sorts that might lead you to the wrong path. And just because we all naturally are trying to seek material comfort that comes through wealth, and if I wasn't presented the same opportunity to attain to this wealth, I might take myself into activities that are not honest and yet that lead me to material wealth. I'm not saying that I agree with the behavior. I'm just explaining the behavior, that if anyone placed in those social conditions might feel the same way or might even do the same things. Some of the stories I heard in jail, it would be almost possible for that individual to become something else. Almost impossible because of all the influences that this person received. So, my suggestion is next time you are in a situation in which you feel prejudice, you have an idea about a person, even though you do not know that person, overcome your emotions by giving yourself time to know that person. Because only time, after reflection, about knowing the individual, will give you a better idea of who that person is. And do not judge the entire group of individual solely upon that person. We have to actually know individual by individual and not judge a group of individuals by one individual. And what this has to do with Spiritism? Well, that's because Spiritism explains to us that this is nothing but a vehicle. Our bodies, it's a machine, and because it's such a perfect machine, gives us the illusion that we are the machine. I always like to give this analogy because it helps people to really distinguish the machine from the individual. Back in the 1970s, when you drove a car, you really drove a car. That car had no hydraulics of any kind. When you arrived at your destination, you probably had muscle aches from all the effort you had to drive the car. But nowadays, you have electric cars. And some of these electric cars, for example, Tesla, you speak to the car and the car takes you somewhere. And there are now studies done with neuroscientists. They place an electrode in a person's head, and that person is able to control a video game just with their thoughts. So the technology is zooming in, it's narrowing in a day in which we're going to be able just to think about our destination and the car would just take us. And this is not far-fetched in the future. It's something that's very near. So you're going to sit in the car, you think about the destination, the car just takes you. And once we get to that moment, it would be very hard to distinguish where the car ends and you begin, or where you end and the car begins. You're so interconnected with the car that you probably believe that you are the car. And that's what this machine is. Our body is a vehicle. It's not a vehicle made up of steel or plastic or wood. It's a vehicle made up of cells and organs, and is such a perfect machine that gives us the illusion that we are the machine. But we're not. We're just we're conducting, we're driving this machine. And the machine that we have is based upon our spiritual needs. In other words, if we have a spiritual need to be born in that or that ethnicity, we will. Because the driver in the machine does not belong to a particular ethnicity. When a spirit is actually evolved, that spirit, it's not necessarily French, German, American, Argentinian. The spirit is an evolved spirit. And in the process of evolution, we will pick different experiences that we need in order to develop ourselves intellectually and morally. So from the Spiritism point of view, race has absolutely no grounds. And this is why the compilator of this philosophy, Allan Kardec, the French educator, he put this book together called the Spirits Book, and which is a collection of all the knowledge of the highly evolved individuals that step foot on this planet to help us to move to the next step. So he organized this book, this amazing body of knowledge that makes us leap forward towards our perfection. And there's a section in the Spirits Book that discusses about races, and particularly question 52, where Allan Kardec asks, where does different races come from? And the highly evolved spirits, they say that it was our adaptability to different environments and social and cultural needs that help us to change throughout the millennia. And also these changes led to uh, different body forms, and these different body forms mixed to have different people. And so we have a constant diversity going on in nature. The interesting thing is that this book was published in 1857, prior to The Origin of Species, published by Charles Darwin, which claim the same thing. We are all brothers and sisters. And until we don't see ourselves in this light, we will create confusion for ourselves. In Spiritism, there is so much knowledge about the law of action and reaction and how we create the difficult situations for ourselves. The literature is abundant in teaching us that our today's action would have repercussions in the future. Our present is made up of the sum of our actions from our past. And in the book Renunciation, this is a book written by the Spirit Emmanuel through the hands of Francisco Xavier. He writes about this girl who had this extraordinary ability to help her family. Let me just open another parenthesis here. I'm very concerned that when we're actually quarantined, there were a lot of people who told me, friends and families, they said, I'm going to take this time to revisit all the Netflix series I want to watch, or maybe I want to watch these movies. And they're all telling me how they will entertain themselves. I know entertainment is important, but entertainment alone does not feed the soul. In other words, it does not provide us with the psychological tools that we need to overcome our obstacles and our challenges. And I would not even be extreme here. I would tell my friends, okay, go ahead, watch your Netflix series, watch one episode, but then read a chapter of this book. Watch another episode and then read a second chapter of this book, because the book not only entertains you, but also, because it's a true story, it gives you so much resilience. When you're done reading this book, you feel so powerful. And reason being is because it changes the perception of your own problems. Your problems are the same, but because you change the way you see them, it looks like they are very little right now, because the value we give to problems are completely arbitrary. We tell ourselves how small or big they are. So if I think that my problem is very big, it becomes unsolvable. If I see that my problem is very small, of course, I could solve that problem. So by reading this book, Renunciation, that's the title of the book, Renunciation, which is our ability to attend to other people's need before our own. That's one of the aspects of renunciation. It tells the story of this amazing woman, Alcyone, who helps her entire family. But the point I want to get is that in this book, and it has so much history content. I just love this book. It explains to us why some of the states that we live here in the U.S. has the name that it has. For example, New Jersey, New York, New England, Newark. And that's because the Europeans who came from these places in Europe, they came from York, they came from Jersey, they came from Orleans. And when they arrived here, they missed their home so much that they want to transform this new place in their new home. Therefore, New Jersey, New York, and so forth. And in this book tells the story of this man who gets involved with the slave trade. And he does so much abuse, but he gains wealth. And because he gains wealth, he is later in the book killed by those who want to usurp his business. And as a result, he sees himself in the spiritual plane full of guilt for all the bad things he has done. So he reincarnates now as a son of a slave. So the same spirit with all that moral debt reincarnates, not as a person of a light skin, but a person, a son of a slave. Not only this, but he was also born with a birth defect on his leg. And it was practiced back in those days that if you were a son of a slave and you had a birth defect, you were killed immediately after birth. So he was given up for adoption, and he spent most of his existence humiliated by all these conditions he had to go through. And this was the spirit who was going through these trials, not as a means of punishment, but as an educational process for him to learn all different races. Because we are all, my friends, brothers and sisters of one another. We stem from the Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and sapiens. We're all from the same family. There is no point of us treating each other differently just because we look differently. It's an illusion. We're all from the same family. And from the religious point of view, our Christ has taught us the Lord's Prayer. And in the Lord's Prayer, we say, Our Father. That's how we begin the Lord's Prayer. If God is our Father, automatically that make us all brothers and sisters of one another. So my suggestion it is, next time at work, with your neighbors, with anyone that looks different than you, do not have a prejudgment. Do not create a concept of who they are before you know them. Give yourself the chance through time to know who they are. And even if they do not turn out to be great people, do not judge the entire group based on that individual, because you have goodness and people who are temporarily morally sick everywhere. Do your best to become a healthy individual, a spiritually healthy individual in this society, so you could do your part in making this a better world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, friend Julio, very much for being here with us, for giving us this absolutely illuminating talk. Really, really appreciate everyone who is here with us. So, what I would like to do next is a couple things here. So, first, I need to publicly apologize. I got a little nervous, and we ended up skipping the initial prayer, the opening prayer. So, a deep apology to my good friend Antulio Borneo, who had prepared with his radio voice a beautiful prayer, which we will save for the next English talk, because now you're going to want to hear his voice the next times, I'm pretty sure. But I'm sure the environment was so harmonious, and the good spirits were certainly operating, amongst us, and certainly blessing our good friend Julio and everyone else, that I think we just felt like we could start the talk. So thank you very much. But we will continue. Now I'm going to ask Andrea Haddad Amorim from the Centro de Estudios Espíritas Allan Kardec in Panama to conduct our closing prayer. And distant healing, you are on mute, Andrea. Okay, now you're not. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to invite you all to follow me in thoughts. And if you feel like, please close your eyes so we can go deeply into a state of meditation, maybe, of linking our hearts to our beloved benefactors who are here protecting and inspiring this work. Dear Lord, we would like to thank you for allowing us to be gathered here in the name of Jesus. Even though we are not physically together, we are gathered spiritually in communion of thoughts. Inspired by the words of our friend Julio Carvalho, may the sentiment of charity always animate our hearts towards one another. When dealing with others, may we be able to understand them and do not force them to live or think according to our standards. Everyone acts according to their own stage of spiritual growth. If we regard our neighbors as someone in need of understanding, we'll be able to place ourselves in the position of helping them grow and unfold spiritually. When jealousy, envy, rebelliousness, prejudice seek shelter within ourselves, let us pray and remember that we are all students in the school of life and that Jesus is our master. He is our model of patience and gentleness. As we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, just like students facing the hardship of their final exams before graduation, let us rest our faith in God and carry on the good work, for we have been created for a happy and healthy life. We also express our gratitude for all that we have received, for the good times, for bringing us happiness, but also for the bad times, for allowing us to grow and become better human beings. We take this time to extend our loving thoughts to those who are facing the loss of their beloved ones, to those families whose lives have been affected by the coronavirus. May they find strength to overcome these difficult times. We also pray for those who feel that this is an unbearable moment and are contemplating suicide. May our loving thoughts find their hearts, easing their pain. We would also like to take this moment to remember John Lewis and all the civil rights leaders for their legacy, for trying to make our society a more equal and fraternal place. Finally, let us picture the image of our beloved Master Jesus, placing his hands over our planet, irradiating light. We imagine rays of love and health leaving Jesus' hands and enveloping earth in the most abundant way, reaching the hearts of every human being, incarnate or discarnate, elevating the vibration of our planet and bringing peace to all and every home on earth. So be it.
And so be it. Thank you very much, Andrea. And again, thank you very much, Julio, for being here with us on this day. It's an honor and a pleasure. And I'm going to turn to our dear friend, Claudia, for the final announcements before we wish everyone a great week.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, hello, my name is Claudia, and I know we did in the beginning, but I would like to welcome all of you that came to our study today for the first time. And I ask just a couple more minutes of your attention. I'm going to show some information. You can use a camera to take a picture of the screen, or you can contact us by email if you like that info forwarded to you. So I know we had some friends here today, new ones, and I would like to share a series of talks in English that the United States Spiritist Federation posted on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and you type Spiritist Talk Series, you should see it. They have about 13 to 14 now, and they update every Saturday, 11 a.m. So if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about the topic, also there's another website called Kardecpedia.com, and this website is available in Portuguese, English, Spanish, and in French. And as Julio says, there's the Spiritist book, the Gospel according to the Spiritism. You know, all the books that Kardec wrote, they are in this website, and you can explore and study a little bit more. And last, I would like to also suggest that spiritistacademy.com. It is a great website for you to learn a little bit more about the Spiritism, and they also have a study series, and they post new contents. So and then next week, we are going to continue with our study of the Spiritism doctrine. We have in Portuguese from 9:15 to 10:15. Next week, we'll continue destruction law and conservation law. We have the public studies that we just watched from 10:30 to 11:30, also in Portuguese next week. And at the same time, we have a class for the teenagers and the kids. As Eduardo said in the beginning, we are planning a new English study in September. So if you have not done yet, you can go to our website and sign up to get our emails, and you'll get notified of our next English study also. But for now, that's it. I hope that our study today was able to inspire you, and then you have a great week, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Claudia. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much again, Julio, for being with us.
My pleasure.
Bye, everyone.